It was supposed to be just another day in court, a high-stakes trial, a serious charge, and a man facing up to 20 years behind bars. The tension in the room was already heavy, but no one could have predicted how fast things would spiral out of control, or how one woman's calm strength would change everything. In a packed courtroom filled with lawyers, officers, and spectators, emotions were running high. The defendant, clearly on edge, stood before the judge awaiting his sentence. But instead of accepting the court's decision, he did something no one expected. In a shocking outburst, he snapped. His voice rose, his anger boiled over, and suddenly he was charging toward the bench. People gasped. The officers moved fast to restrain him, but the damage was done. Cameras were rolling. The tension hit its peak. The judge, an experienced, composed black woman who had handled countless tough cases, found herself at the center of a situation that was anything but routine. But what she did next left the entire courtroom stunned. This wasn't just a story about a man who lost control. This was about a woman who refused to be shaken, a judge who showed what true authority and grace looked like under pressure. No shouting, no fear, just presence. What unfolded in those next few minutes flipped the script and taught everyone in that room a powerful lesson about respect, identity, and justice. You might think you've seen courtroom drama before, but this moment wasn't scripted. It was real, it was raw, and it revealed more about human nature, prejudice, and power than any law book ever could. The crowd didn't expect what happened next, and neither will you. So stay tuned, because this story is only just getting started, and trust me, the twist at the end is something you won't forget. The man standing trial that day wasn't new to the system. His name had been on case files before: petty theft, assault, a string of poor choices that had finally caught up with him. But this time, the charges were serious. He was looking at 2 decades behind bars for a violent offense, and the courtroom knew it wasn't looking good for him. His lawyer had already made a last-minute plea, but the evidence was solid, and the judge assigned to the case. Known for being fair but firm, Judge Williams had seen it all. With over 15 years on the bench, she had earned a reputation for her calm demeanor, sharp legal mind, and unwavering sense of justice. What many didn't know was that she had once been a public defender, fighting for people just like the man now glaring at her from across the room. She understood struggle, she understood redemption, but she also understood consequences. And when she entered that courtroom, she didn't bring bias, she brought balance. The defendant, however, didn't see any of that. All he saw was someone in a position of power standing between him and freedom. The pressure had been building for weeks. Rumors had been swirling that he might lash out, but no one expected him to do it in open court. As she read the final statements, his breathing quickened, fists clenched, and before anyone could stop it, he erupted. His words were harsh, his tone was loud. The moment became chaotic in seconds. Officers moved quickly, grabbing his arms and pulling him back, but the energy in the room had shifted. Everyone was on edge. Spectators, lawyers, even the stenographer paused. But Judge Williams didn't flinch. Her hands remained steady. Her eyes locked onto his with something more powerful than anger: understanding. That's when the atmosphere changed. Not because of anything he said, but because of what she did next. Her response wasn't what anyone expected, especially him. And in that moment, something happened that would stay with every person in that room for the rest of their lives. But the real twist, that was still to come. As the defendant was pulled back and the courtroom began to settle, whispers rippled through the gallery. Some were shocked by his outburst, others by the judge's response, or lack of one. But what most people missed in that moment was the look in Judge Williams' eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was disappointment, and that silent expression said more than any gavel could. Behind the scenes, courtroom staff exchanged glances. The bailiff, who had worked with her for years, had never seen anything quite like it. The prosecutors stayed tense, unsure if the judge would call for a mistrial or issue a contempt ruling. But she didn't. Instead, she asked for the room to be cleared temporarily, her voice calm, steady, and somehow more commanding than ever. Everyone obeyed. While the room emptied, something bigger was unfolding. News had already begun to trickle out. Someone had recorded the moment on their phone, and within an hour, the clip was making rounds online. Social media lit up with comments. Some praised the judge's composure. Others questioned whether the defendant's anger was driven by something deeper, frustration, injustice, or maybe even something more personal. What few people knew was that the defendant had filed a complaint weeks earlier, accusing the system of bias. He had claimed the court had it out for him, and that people in power never gave guys like him a real shot. Whether his claims held any weight or not, one thing was clear: this case was no longer just about legal guilt. It was about perception, power, and pain that went far beyond the courtroom walls. Meanwhile, Judge Williams had a choice to make. She could follow protocol and let the outburst define the moment, or she could dig deeper. Her legal advisor, seated quietly in the back of the courtroom, leaned forward, sensing that something bigger was in motion. There were layers here: old wounds, generational mistrust, and a justice system often seen as one-sided. As the judge returned to the bench, the room silent once more. Everyone waited to see what she would do. But no one could predict what came next, because the next decision she made would shake more than just the courtroom. It would shake the system itself. When Judge Williams returned to the bench, the room was so quiet you could hear the shuffling of papers in the back row. The defendant had been escorted to a side chamber to calm down, and the crowd, now back in their seats, watched with wide eyes, waiting for what she'd say. But instead of addressing the outburst, she did something no one expected. She asked for a short recess and then quietly stepped down from the bench, walking toward her chambers without a word. Behind those closed doors, a different kind of conversation was unfolding. The governor's chief legal advisor, who had been quietly observing everything from the gallery, met her there. Turns out, she wasn't just visiting. She had received reports about the judge and this case, whispers that this wasn't just a matter of law, but something political, something charged. There were questions about the case's handling, rumors about pressure from above to make an example, and now, with the outburst going viral, everything was under the spotlight. The tension wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It had moved to City Hall, to the DA's office, to newsrooms across the country. The case was becoming a symbol, a flashpoint for debates about race, fairness, and how justice looks different depending on who's in front of the bench. Judge Williams had never asked for the spotlight, but now it was fixed directly on her. Meanwhile, the defendant sat alone, handcuffed, breathing hard, but no longer shouting. His public defender was with him, trying to calm him down, trying to figure out what just happened, and what could possibly happen next. "They were never gonna listen to me," he said quietly. They already had their minds made up. It was a moment of honesty, raw and unfiltered. Back in the courtroom, news crews had gathered outside. The clip of the outburst had already gone viral, sparking debates online. Was he a threat? Was he reacting to injustice? Was the judge going to crack down or take a different path? As Judge Williams prepared to return to the courtroom, no one knew which direction things would go. But one thing was certain: the next words out of her mouth were going to change everything, and the whole country was about to be watching. Just as the courtroom doors swung open and Judge Williams began walking back to the bench, a man in a navy suit stood up from the back row. He wasn't part of the press, he wasn't a lawyer, and he hadn't spoken a word all day. But now, with a calm voice and a raised hand, he asked to be heard. For a moment, everyone froze. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to escort him out, but the judge held up her hand. She recognized him immediately, and that changed everything. The man was a former federal prosecutor, now turned whistleblower. He had once worked closely with the district attorney's office, the same one that had brought the case against the defendant, and what he claimed next shook the courtroom to its core. He said there was evidence that had never been submitted, evidence that could change the direction of the case entirely. Not only that, but he hinted that someone higher up may have intentionally pushed the case forward to make an example out of the defendant, knowing full well that the story would gain traction, especially if the judge presiding over it was a black woman with a record for firm but balanced decisions. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Cameras shifted their focus. The judge's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes narrowed, focused. She asked him to approach. The man handed over a folder, sealed and marked confidential. She took it without a word and signaled for another short recess. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast. The chief legal advisor, still quietly present, now stepped in. She'd seen political moves before, but this one was different. If what this man said was true, then the system itself had been used, and not just against the defendant, but against the judge too. It wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. It was a high-level power play, with careers and reputations hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, outside, the crowd was growing. News vans lined the street. Protesters were beginning to gather, some supporting the judge, others demanding transparency in the case. Tensions were rising. And inside, with the judge holding a folder that could flip the entire case upside down, one thing was clear: the real battle had just begun. Judge Williams returned to the bench with the sealed folder in her hand. The courtroom was packed again, and this time the tension felt heavier, like everyone could sense they were about to witness something bigger than a sentencing. She took a moment, glancing around the room, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at the defendant, who now sat silently between two guards, his anger gone, replaced by confusion and fatigue. Her voice, steady but sharp, echoed through the room. She announced that newly surfaced evidence had come to her attention, evidence that raised serious questions about the integrity of the case. She didn't go into details yet, but the weight of her words was clear. Something was off, and she was no longer willing to let it slide under the radar. She ordered a pause in sentencing and called for an emergency review of the case files. The room erupted. Lawyers objected, reporters typed furiously, and the defendant's eyes widened, unsure if this was real. But then came the real twist. Judge Williams turned toward the prosecutor's table and addressed a name not listed on the case docket. She called out a senior official from the district attorney's office by name, a man who wasn't even supposed to be there, but had slipped in quietly during the commotion. She accused him of knowingly withholding evidence that could have altered the case's outcome. A hush fell over the room. No one moved. The man stood slowly, trying to speak, but the judge cut him off. With calm authority, she explained how the folder revealed a statement from a key witness, one that confirmed the defendant hadn't acted alone, and that the more violent charges had been exaggerated, and more shocking, that the witness had been pressured to stay silent. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. This wasn't just a bad case, it was manipulated. As the judge declared the case officially reopened, the crowd outside began to cheer. Cameras flashed. Justice, it seemed, was finally catching up. But just when everyone thought the story had peaked, the final twist hit: the whistleblower. He wasn't acting alone. He had been sent by the governor herself. The chief legal advisor had known all along, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. And that truth, it didn't just shake one courtroom, it sent ripples through the entire justice system. In the days that followed, the courtroom drama that unfolded became a national story. News outlets picked it up across the country, headlines flooded timelines, and people couldn't stop talking about the moment justice took an unexpected turn. The defendant's case was put under full review, and within a week, the most serious charges were dropped. He wasn't declared innocent of everything, but it became clear he had been pushed into a corner by a system that was supposed to protect him, not punish him unfairly. He would still serve time, but not 20 years, and not under a false narrative. Judge Williams, once simply respected in legal circles, was now being celebrated across the country for her courage, integrity, and refusal to be silenced in the face of pressure. She never asked for the spotlight, but her handling of the case reminded people that true leadership isn't loud. It's steady, thoughtful, and deeply human. She didn't act out of fear or anger. She followed the truth, even when it was inconvenient. The prosecutor who had tried to suppress the evidence was placed under investigation, and the DA's office came under public scrutiny. Internal audits were launched, and conversations about justice reform gained fresh momentum. Behind the scenes, the governor's office made it clear that change was coming, and the whistleblower, once unsure if anyone would listen, finally saw that speaking up still mattered. For the defendant, the experience left him shaken, but also seen. For the first time, someone in a position of power had looked past his anger and pain and saw something deeper, his humanity. And while his journey wasn't over, it was no longer defined by a single outburst in a courtroom. This story wasn't just about one man or one judge. It was about how quickly assumptions can shape outcomes, how power can be misused, and how one act of integrity can change the direction of everything. In a world where justice doesn't always feel balanced, this case reminded everyone watching that sometimes the system can still surprise you in the best way.